Just as they were falling asleep, Paphnutius became anxious, his fur fluffed up, and he mewed loudly and fearfully. Outside the gate there was a familiar stomping and neighing of horses, and then a muffled laughter. Indistinct shadows swept across the yard, and a clammy horror stiffened the movements. The cat howled terribly, hoarsely, low, like a dog, cowered in a corner. Kostya and Ira Potapov were city dwellers, in some 5th generation, no less. None of their ancestors had ever lived not only in the countryside, but even in some near suburb. They too lived in a city of millions, in ordinary city flats, and the maximum of land and plants growing on it they saw only in the park on flower beds. They both graduated from university, he, in metal processing technology, she, in inorganic chemistry. Everything was technological, urban, metropolitan. They found each other at some student party, and immediately realized that it wasn't just chance, it was fate. We met for a couple of months and got to know each other's parents. They were also city dwellers to the bone, also engaged in purely urban work at a large city-forming plant. The choice of children approved, played a quiet, good, decent wedding. By joint efforts they organized a small flat for them, and blessed them to live, and gain good things. The young people were doing quite well, and even made some good. But gradually one very unpleasant problem came to light. Ira could not get pregnant. At first they didn't pay attention to it. Well, it was just a matter of unfavorable days or something else. Then we began to calculate the days, to do everything purposefully, using different methods and exercises recommended for better conception. In vain. We decided to examine, signed up in a good paid clinic, went through all the examinations, took all sorts of analyses. The doctor's verdict was unanimous. Both are healthy, there are no obstacles to conception. It was not surprising. Neither of them had serious illnesses. Both of them had no turbulent past with mistakes of youth. Neither of them had any abortions. Kostik was her first man. On the perplexed question, why? Doctors shrugged their shoulders, suggested to pass some examinations abroad, but it was too expensive and troublesome. They decided to live as it was. They did not despair, did not blame each other, did not quarrel. Kostik drank a bottle or two of beer on weekends and did not increase the dose, did not drown his sorrow in wine. They loved each other calm, quiet love without Mexican passions and outbursts of emotions, and did not let misfortune break their well-established life. They had a red fat cat, Paphnutiy, whom they caressed and pleasured instead of a child. A neighbor, Aunt Marina, who regularly attended the Orthodox Church, said that there was nothing wrong, it was God's will. It was not for sins, not as a punishment, but simply, their time had not yet come. One should be patient and not grumble. And they did not murmur, they continued to live a quiet and peaceful life. They also quietly and modestly celebrated their crystal wedding, 15 years, and the next day Kostya, embarrassed, said, "Listen, Mother, I've been thinking. You've wanted a holiday cottage outside the city for a long time, haven't you? Maybe we really should buy such a holiday cottage. We'll come for weekends in the summer. Or we'll work harder and find one closer to work, eh?" "Sure, let's do it," Ira rejoiced. "I've told you so many times and you kept refusing. We have the money, just find out where it is. I'm not good with the internet." Indeed, they had money. They earned quite well, and there were no special expenses for two people. Food, clothes, utilities. Without children, what special expenses? So they agreed. Kostya began to look for options, and Irina, to prepare for country life. In the end, after not very long searches, they found a good option. Not so close, but on the line of the train. It will be possible, and on weekdays from the dacha to go to work. The house is neglected, but still quite strong. The plot is small, but they were not going to grow a miracle garden, just for themselves. Flowers, some potatoes, cucumbers, tomatoes, parsley and dill to eat at the dacha. The village is not very inhabited, mostly old people, but they did not decide to settle there for good. But so, a country estate, to rest in the fresh air, to clear their lungs from the city smog. The owner died about 10 years ago, The children inherited the property, but they visited it periodically, being more interested in their estate than benefiting from it. That's why the price wasn't too high, so both parties hit it off without delay. Immediately after signing and registering the documents for the house, the Potapovs began to put it in order. For a small fee they hired some local alkies who cleared the plot and emptied the house of all the rubbish. Then they managed themselves. The house was cleaned, painted, plastered and patched. They decided not to renovate the house. They could sleep in it, they would save up some money for the autumn and winter, and then renovate it in the spring. In the meantime, Kostya realized his long-standing dream. He built a steam bath and a swimming pool next to it, which took all the rest of the money he had saved. We came at weekends, worked in the house and vegetable garden, and ate village milk, cottage cheese and sour cream, which we bought from the locals. They brought with them a cat, Pafnuti, who at first was wild, but then got used to it, and surveyed the plot with pleasure, but did not go into other people's yards, being justly afraid of the local cats, who had a great advantage in a fight before him, a couch potato. He respected homemade sour cream and a sweet afternoon nap on the cool veranda. More and more often they stayed overnight, and on weekdays, leaving by early train to the city. But the faster the renovation moved towards the end, and the longer they lived at their dacha, the more often strange and even disturbing events began to happen to them. Suddenly in the evening there would be a noise on the road outside the gate, horse neighing, and even the stomping of hooves. Where would it come from? Nobody kept any horses in the village for a long time, only cars, motorbikes, and mopeds. Then suddenly a wave of some clammy fear would come up and send an icy chill down my spine. Then in the morning, when it was darkest and the roosters were silent in their coops, footsteps would be heard around the house. Pafnuti always reacted alarmingly. He meowed in a voice that was not his own, puffed the fur on his back, and huddled in a corner. And what else was noticed? It always happened when Irina was in the house, alone or with Kostya. If he was alone and she went to town, there was never any disturbing phenomena. It was decided that Irina would not stay alone in the house. No matter what, it would be creepy. Not creepy, but really creepy. Both of them were baptized, but they didn't wear crosses, didn't keep icons in the house, didn't know any prayers. Being in the city, Ira went to the temple after work, bought and put candles, prayed as much as she could. She even dared to talk to the priest. The priest listened attentively, affectionately complained that people do not go to church, do not wear crosses. He told me to buy crosses for myself and my husband, the simplest, inexpensive, on strings. To put them on and not to take them off. Hang icons in the house, sprinkle them with holy water, and then to be married to her husband, to take communion, and he gave her some brochure. She liked very much that they did not scold her, did not impose anything, and did not demand money. When she wanted to hand the bishop some notes, he smiled and pointed to the donation box. Irina brought the icons to the dacha, told them to put on crosses, hang icons, ineptly sprinkled holy water from a bottle, even read from a book some prayer in incomprehensible Church Slavonic. To their general surprise and relief, the strange events, if not completely stopped, became much weaker and less frequent. Sometimes only they heard some angry roaring outside the gate and the stamping of hooves, but nothing happened in the yard or in the house. Gradually the Potapovs almost forgot about it, especially as they were about to celebrate the completion of the small repairs in the house and the commissioning of the steam room with a swimming pool. Kostya had prepared firewood in advance, dried it, chopped it into logs, and stacked it in a neat log pile under the awning. They decided to set the table in the yard so that neighbors could come in, have a drink or two, eat freshly cooked kebab, congratulate them on the completion of construction. From the main guests were invited couples of friends of the husband and wife's mates. On the eve of the holiday we went to bed early, so that tomorrow we would have time to prepare everything before the guests arrived. Just when they started to fall asleep, Paphnutius became anxious, his fur fluffed up, and he mewed deafeningly and fearfully. Outside the gate there was a familiar stomping and neighing of horses, and then muffled laughter. Indistinct shadows swept across the yard, and a clammy horror stiffened the movements. The cat howled fearfully, hoarsely, low, like a dog, and scrambled into a corner. Irina remembered that lately she had almost stopped sprinkling holy water in the corners, and she had hidden the cross somewhere after washing. With difficulty she reached for the book, and began to read prayers in a broken voice, not understanding their meaning, and not trying to understand. In the courtyard she heard howling and vaguely distinguishable curses, then the rattle of scattered logs and gloating laughter. Soon there was the sound of horses neighing, the clatter of hooves, and all was quiet. Poor Paphnutius was trembling, and would not come out of his corner. Ira pulled the cat out, took him in her arms, pressed him against her. The redhead sobbed, and hid on his mistress's chest, either fleeing from the fear he had experienced, or saving his mistress. Kostya wanted to go out into the yard to see what was going on, but she demanded to put on a cross and sprinkle holy water all around. The cat calmed down a little, and she went to the window. It was quiet, the gate was open, and all the logs were scattered near the shed. But in the middle of the yard there was one log, a thick, strong one, tapered at one end into a convenient handle, like a club. Kostya put it aside. He decided to keep it with him as a weapon. Of course there was no use for a club against evil, but he felt more secure with it. A cough was heard at the gate, and the light of a cigarette flickered. "Hey, neighbor," said a voice, "are you awake?" "What sleep?" Kostya recognized his neighbor Nikolai, a drunkard and a lazy man, his age, but still single. At the same time, Kolya was good-natured, ready to help if necessary. And when he drank too much, he did not rage, did not get into a fight, but just sat down on a bench in his yard and sang lingering, sad songs. He lived with his mother, a noisy, vocal Babazina, however, also quite harmless. There, what passions and troubles are going on. He used to scare me with sounds, and now he's ruined the woodpile. "It's Verkhovoy," sighed Kolya. "It's been a long time since I've seen him." "Who's Verkhovoy?" Kostya was surprised. "There used to be one here," sighed the neighbor reluctantly. "A long time ago after the war. I didn't see him myself, but they told me." "So you tell me, Kolya. Wait a minute, I'll be right back." Kostya rushed into the house, took a bottle of vodka, a couple of shots, some sausage and bread from tomorrow's stock. "Go to bed, it's all over now. Take Funka with you, he'll purr for you. And Kolya will tell me something about this business." He intercepted her glance at the bottle and nodded reassuringly. "Don't worry, I won't drink too much. I just need to relieve stress." When he went out into the courtyard, he didn't see Nikolai. I cursed to myself. It was very interesting to learn about Verkhovy, and I wanted to have a drink or two, but you can't do it alone. The gate opened, and Kolya came in, clutching to his chest a few tomatoes and cucumbers and a pinch of salt in a paper. "There," he whispered contentedly. "I knew you were after a bubble, so I decided to snack on some snacks in my mother's garden." They settled down at a small table in the courtyard near a ruined log cabin, drank the first and then the second, and Kolya began his story. As they say, Verkhovoy appeared in our village before the war. He married a local maiden and started to live with her at her parents' house, as a primaka, so to speak. But at once he announced that he was going to build a good house, a good one, where he would move with his wife and future children. He got a job at the collective farm as a stable boy. He knew and understood horses. They say there was something gypsy about him, tall, black, curly-haired. And in the stables there was a stallion called Raven, just as black, angry, unsociable. Nobody could approach him. They even wanted to sell him for sausage. The first time he rode this Raven through the village, people flew away, many of them even secretly baptized. Nikolai made a sign to fill the shot glasses. They clinked glasses, drank, and he continued. Since then he had never been seen on foot, except occasionally in the hut and in the yard. He always drove his Raven and bared his teeth, smiling or threatening. They even forgot his name. At first they called him Horseman, Cavalryman, and then they switched to Rider, and that's how the name stuck. As if horsemen and cavalrymen were men of service, understandable, not evil for no reason. But this one was a horseman, that's all. But he built a house as he promised, in the middle of nowhere, by the swamp, far away from everyone. They were built by some black-bearded men who came from nowhere, though the chairman checked their documents, because at that time they were not allowed to bring in passportless people. It was a dangerous business. Anyway, the house was built, but they didn't have time to live in it. The war. Verkhovoi and Voron disappeared from the village at once. They say they went to the front, to the cavalry. But nobody knew anything for sure, they asked his wife. But she kept silent, saying that she had not received any letters from her husband. And Ninka the postmistress confirmed that she knew who wrote to whom. And in the 44th, when ours had already gone to liberate Europe, they came to the village in a couple, together with Raven. Again Verkhovoi took a job as a stable boy, and he grinned and didn't answer all the questions. The chairman only muttered that everything was in order with Verkhovoi's documents, as if he had fought the whole war in a partisan detachment. He had no awards or wounds, but he was clean before the law. Why didn't he join the army, the cavalry? The villagers wondered. And the devil knows, spat the chairman angrily, and did not enter into further conversation. Verkhovei's wife, the quiet, inconspicuous Lyudmila, was already pregnant when her husband left, and the boy was now 4. The boy looked just like his mother, with only his father's nose and a white-haired coachman. He was afraid of his father and did not like horses, so Verkhovoi treated him contemptuously. He started to build up the house and to take care of it. But he was extremely greedy. He counted every penny and kept his wife and son in starvation. How she managed. But she sent the boy to the Suvorov school, away from his tyrant father. At first he was furious, but she was able to convince him that it was for the best. The boy is on full state support, not a penny to spend on him. But Verkhovoi grew more and more furious the further he went on. He ran round the village, looking for bad things and dragging them all into the house. He said, "I'll build a palace and you'll be like a queen, wearing silk and brocade." And he laughed terribly. And when he finished the house, he said that there was no reason to get fat. He had to expand the farm, to send out a cow, to feed piglets. It was then that his wife for the first time dared to object to him that she wanted to live, not to slave on a private farm, to turn into an old woman, and promised to run away to the city. That's when Verkhovoi got mad to the full. He beat his wife to death right in the house, jumped on his raven and was gone. Since then no one has seen him, but they only said that from the direction of the rotten swamp they heard horses neighing and death cries. So gradually everyone began to forget about him, but here's a problem. In our village all the girls and women were dark-haired, but his wife was fair-haired. So, as soon as such a woman came to live with us, the Highlander would appear. The horse roared, laughter was heard, footsteps in the yard. He tormented the white ones as much as he could, though he could not kill them by his ghostly nature, but he did everything for that. One girl was killed by her boyfriend, her fiancé. He was jealous, but he put a bullet in her forehead. She fell to the ground dead, poor thing. Another woman was tormented by her husband's nagging, and she ran away from him and ran straight into the swamp. And he killed himself, and the children were orphaned. It was back in the 50s then, about 10 years later, a local married a white girl like that. He almost killed her too, but they managed to escape to the city. So why didn't you warn me right away? Irisha is blonde. I wouldn't have bought anything here. Well, listen to this. After that, it just stopped. A few more blondes came round, but nobody bothered them. More than 50 years have passed. Everyone has already forgotten about Verkhovei, and here's the trouble with you. I don't even know why it happened. Anyway, hang in there, brother. What can I say? Konstantin sat for a while longer and went into the house to sleep. The next morning, though he hadn't had much to drink, he was feeling pretty bad. He had a headache. Everything around him was irritating. Even his beloved wife, who fussed about the house in a petty, womanish way, wailing that she had no time for anything. Even the adored Funya Paphnutius, who had quite come to his senses and was tangling under his feet. Kostya went out into the courtyard, began to tidy up the woodpile, put the braziers in order. He prepared everything so that he wouldn't have to look for it later, tried the water in the pool. It would be necessary to warm it up a little later. Kostenka, Olya, and Vladik called. "They'll be a little late." Ira ran up. "We won't wait for anyone," Kostya grumbled angrily. He had already had a few times to the bottle hidden behind the logs, but it didn't get better. On the contrary, a nasty cold lump was throbbing under his spine. The guests began to arrive. Konstantin took them around the plot, bragged about the new bathhouse and swimming pool, but he did not feel joy as before. They just sat down at the table when Olya and Vladik, who had threatened to be late, arrived. He categorically refused to take them on an excursion, angrily muttering, "Let's go to the table, have a drink, eat, then I'll show you everything." We drank, ate, and had a funny conversation. Kostya got up, went to the brazier, moved the wood. Soon it would be necessary to put skewers with meat. He sat down at the table, put some salad, and suddenly threw his plate on the ground, shouting at his wife, "You've oversalted it again, you handy woman, how many times can I say it?" He poured half a glass of vodka and drank it. There was a heavy pause at the table. Everyone knew each other well, and no one had ever seen such scenes in the Potapov family. "Well, why are you so quiet?" He looked angrily at the guests. "Don't pay attention, eat, drink, the kebab will be here soon." He went to the brazier, moved the burning coals, began to lay out the skewers. "Kostenka, the coals haven't gone out yet, the meat will burn," Ira said timidly. "I forgot to ask you," Kostya muttered, barely restraining himself, and yet he snapped into a shout, "Don't meddle with your woman's mind in men's affairs." The feast hung in the air. No one wanted kebab or other delicacies. Kostya was drunk. He tried to hum something, drank more vodka. The barbecue smelled of burnt meat. On an open fire it began to char. "Kostenka, I told you," Ira splashed her hands. "Now the meat is burnt." The head of the family turned to his wife and everyone got scared. His eyes became white, empty, scary. "You bitch! You burnt the meat and you're taking it out on me. I'll kill you!" He snapped into a falsetto. Ira in fear began to retreat slowly, and Kostya went at her, clenching his fists. He tripped over a log, which he had put next to him at night for self-defense, picked it up, laughed happily, comfortably grasped it by the improvised handle, raised it above his head, and rushed at his wife, who had frozen from fear. It's scary to imagine how it could have ended, but Vlad, who was late, reacted in time. He jumped up to Kostya, and with a short swing, knocked him out with a straight punch in the jaw. Outside the gate came the sound of horses neighing and angry swearing. Paphnutius howled wildly, and red lightning rushed to the fence opposite the gate, while from the neighbors Babazina with an icon, and Nikolai with a 3-liter jar of holy water, hurried to the house. Ira was beating hysterically on the grass. The women were calming her down, and the men were dragging the collapsed body of the master of the house with swearing, dipping him into the pool, a couple of times even with his head. Soon his eyes became conscious. Half a jar of holy water was poured on him, and he was dragged out onto the grass. He sat there, eyes fluttering in confusion, looking at his sobbing wife, and asking perplexedly what had happened here. Iria was taken away by Olya and Vladik, Konstantin by another couple. They kept him locked up in their house, even wanted to tie him up. The neighbors told them in a nutshell about Verkov, and asked them not to be too angry with Konstantin. He sat still in his confinement, ate nothing, only cried and begged to be brought to Ira to beg her forgiveness. In the end, he was carefully shown to a psychiatrist, who found no abnormalities, and expressed the opinion that such behavior could be caused by alcohol overlaid with severe stress. Gradually the relationship began to return to normal. Kostya did not touch alcohol and behaved adequately. Unfortunately, their pet Paphnutius, who had then escaped from the plot, disappeared. They decided that they would not return to this village, called Nikolai, and asked him to bring them some things. "What about the house?" Kolya wondered. "Whatever you want, do what you want, we won't come here again." A week later, Nikolai arrived, bringing their things and a cardboard box, from which they could hear scratching and muffled meowing. Kostya literally tore off the lid, and out of it came Pafnuti, dirty, thin, with mad eyes. He rushed to the owners, shrieking with joy, rubbing and bumping his forehead, and they tore him away from each other to press him against them and kiss him. "He just got here yesterday." Mom and I had locked him up till morning so he wouldn't run away, so we brought him here. Anyway, everything ended safely. As it turned out, Nikolai also went into a complete stupor, took up his mind, and according to rumors, is going to get married. He and Zina take care of their house and vegetable garden, grow crops, some of which they bring to Ira and Kostya. Nikolai asked permission to live in their house, which he received safely. So far, everyone was satisfied with this arrangement, and it would be seen from here on. Verkhovoi disappeared again, and everyone hopes that for good. And the most important news? Ira, as it turned out, got pregnant, and the ultrasound showed twins. Everything goes well, and the Potapovs try to forget this bad story, but they still shudder when a horse neighs from the television.